Hi, everyone. In this episode, I'm talking to Dr. Karen Siegemund, who's the director of the American Freedom Alliance. We talk about American foreign policy, Benghazi, the MAGA movement, Steve Bannon, and what the future of the country is going to look like. Great. Dr. Karen Siegemund, thanks for joining.
It's great to be here with you, Jonathan.
You are the director and founder of the American Freedom Alliance.
Director, not founder.
Director,
but yes,
of the
yes,
American Freedom Alliance, whose mission is the defense and promotion of Western civilization.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And just to set this up, I was thinking about how we met. And it was after the election, after Trump won, at a Trump victory party in Santa Monica.
Of all places.
Of all places. And I had been in pretty much isolation during the election cycle, like as a Trump supporter in a liberal world or whatever you want to call it. And I remember you mentioned you were friends with Heather McDonald. And I'd like almost fainted that someone in Los Angeles knew her. And I actually had this shirt made in her honor, and Brendan O'Neill's, who's another journalist that I admire. So we connected on that. And I was also shocked that someone was the director of an organization like this, that it existed here in LA. So I'm super curious about your origin story. You mentioned that Benghazi was like a big moment of awareness for you or awakening. So what's your background? Like, were you always conservative? How did you make your way to MAGA and Bannon and all of this stuff?
Right. First, it was great to have met you at the party. And as you note, Santa Monica is not the place one would expect a Trump victory party, but there we were. And yes, I'm a huge fan of and friend of Heather McDonald. I love your shirt. And when I had tumbled into the American Freedom Alliance, it had been founded by somebody else. And finding that the mission was the defense of Western civilization, I thought, that's a little bit wackadoodle, it's kind of hysterical. And over time, I've realized it's not hysterical at all. It's in fact completely accurate. So how did I come to all of this? You mentioned Benghazi. I had found myself on the right before Benghazi. I never thought of myself or anything as political. So I look back on my life and I'm astounded at my naivety about everything. I was pro-defense. I thought everybody had to be pro-defense. I came up during the Cold War. Why wouldn't you want us to win over the bad guys, over the communists? That just seems so obvious. So defense seemed 100%. So I didn't think of that as political. And it really only was, and I worked in defense for almost 20 years doing underwater acoustics, finding Soviet subs. So I was part of this whole, I was a Cold Warrior.
Wow.
And then when that ended, I turned to being an educator. And I thought, well, that obviously is something everybody needs to be.
And when was that roughly?
That was 2002. So I'd been doing Cold War stuff, Soviet submarines, underwater acoustics. And then we pivoted to whales, which was interesting, but it didn't grab me in the way that Soviet submarines did. And for just during the course of my life, I wound up going back to school and I got a master's degree in international relations because I wanted to understand how things get to be the way they are internationally, that we need to have defense and finding Soviet subs. So I wanted to understand the background of all of that. And I've always been a huge, a glutton about history. So this was a way of studying history, but having it be a little bit more focused. So I did that, and then I became a teacher. And that seemed like it would be obvious that everybody would be wanting the same thing for kids. I was at a private school, and this was in Rhode Island, and I discovered, to my shock, that no, we didn't all feel the same way about education. I thought content was very important. I thought the classics were important. I thought learning how to think was important. I thought discipline was important, and commitment and responsibility and all those things were important.
And that wasn't the case?
It was not the case. And it was kind of through that awareness that I realized education was political. And this was, like I said, 2002, 3, 4, 5, during that era. So it was nothing then like it is now. We didn't hear about diversity, equity, inclusion. Political correctness wasn't so much of a thing. We didn't have all the pressures that there are now. And yet, to me, content was crucial. And that was really one of the most important awakenings. If kids spoke in a fluent manner, for example, and had a beautiful looking PowerPoint, even if everything on every slide and every word out of their mouth was incorrect, that was irrelevant. The important thing was, could they do a nice PowerPoint, and did they speak fluently? And that was my awakening to the fact that we don't all want the same thing, even for our children. And then that whole discovery took on a life of itself. And I realized I'm in a different camp from these people. And it turned out that camp was on the right, which kind of shocked and appalled me. It turned out so I didn't become someone on the right. I discovered that I always had been. And during the course of all of that, and I really was horrified because everything I knew was like, now I need to like NASCAR and just all these stereotypes I completely bought into. But somebody mentioned Thomas Sowell to me. And I thought, okay, I'm on the side of Thomas Sowell. I'm all right. And Victor Davis Hanson, who I had discovered anyway, because he wrote the book, Who Killed Homer? And that was very close to my heart because I was a Latin student and all of this stuff. Who Killed Homer was the idea of taking classics out of education. And I thought that was a horrifying thing. So Thomas Sowell, Victor Davis Hanson, I breathe a little more easily discovering that I'm on the side of these absolutely genius minds. And then I started to ponder, who are the genius minds on the left? And I
Marx.
right, who I thought were correct. And Marx had come up during my dissertation. And there was another one, a Tom Friedman, who was a mega luminary, right?
Oh my God.
Right, but he was the only one, right? So I thought, I'm on Victor Davis Hanson and Thomas Sowell's side. Things will be okay. But then on a daily basis, I started noticing the chasm in how we think. And I had bought into all of the lies, one of them being, we all want the same thing, we just disagree on how to get there. Completely ridiculous. Completely. Just from that one example of teachers not caring about the content, but more about the delivery. And then you get into the content that they prefer. And I thought, who's really doing right by these children? If you really believe that the content is irrelevant, as an educator, what are you doing? And we had conversations about what should they read and what shouldn't they read, and should they really read anything? And is there a canon that's important? Well, which canon? And then I just thought, and this, again, private school, this really terrified me. And so that was sort of the path.
What kind of school was it?
It was a country day school I don't want to get too specific,
Sure.
but it was in Rhode Island, Connecticut. There was, 5 private schools in Rhode Island. And I was at one of them, and it was completely bucolic, absolutely gorgeous, and it terrified me.
And what do you think drove the change or destruction of curriculum?
Yeah,
What's behind all of this at that time, particularly?
Even at that time. So we're seeing the closure, thank goodness, of the Department of Ed, which is great, but private schools weren't beholden to the departments of ed. I think what already was afoot was this notion of self-esteem was key to everything. And you don't want to shame kids. You don't want to put a challenge in front of them that they can't meet. You want always to praise them and always to make them feel good. And which is completely counter to actually what education is. Not that education is about shaming, but certainly it is about challenging. And I was at that school, I taught various things, math being one of them, and I've been a math teacher. Never do I see as much joy in a child as when they have met a challenge they didn't feel up to, but they overcame it. That aha moment is when you watch them grow inches before your very eyes. And it is fabulous. And when all you do is aim for self-esteem over accomplishment, you're denying them that. And I wound up teaching at UMass Dartmouth subsequently, also math, and teaching remedial kids. So kids who were admitted to university, who had come up through public schools, or just shunted through, passed on, nobody cared if they could or couldn't do anything. They knew nothing. And they're supposed to be appreciative of having a college education there at UMass Dartmouth. And I was strict, and I demanded, and I helped, and I brought them up through, and they were so grateful that they said over and over, Dr. Siegemund, you're the first teacher we've had who cares that we're learning. How is it a good thing to just push them through? How is focusing on self-esteem, which is false, of course, if it's not based in anything? And they knew that they were being infantilized. If you have no expectations for them, this does nobody any good. So I think the whole self-esteem movement was a big part of it. I think cowardice on the parts of adults is a big part of it. You don't want to be the bad guy. Well, you have to be the bad guy. It was a time when parenting was challenged. Where are the grown-ups? Diana West had written a spectacular book, Death of the Grown-Up. That was a big part of it. It was the early days of child-centered education. What is that? We're the grown-ups. We need to determine what is and isn't important. We need to raise children to help them develop, nurture them. That's what parents are supposed to do, and teachers. So
I'm thinking of like Greta Thunberg.
For example,
like
completely.
The wisdom of the child.
That's right.
Kind of thing.
And we're all supposed to fall in line. And the other one, Greta, absolutely perfect example, as is also AOC.
Yes.
She is the perfect product of exactly this. Delivery is everything. And she's learned that being combative and sassy and cute and smart aleck, I was going to use another word, but I don't know where this...
You can say whatever you want. It's America. You can say whatever you want here.
The content is appalling, and nobody has ever corrected her on it. She is the absolute... When people say the education system failed her, I disagree. The current education system produced her with all intent. She is the quintessence of their aims. Perfect example. The other side of it is my heart breaks for her because what's upstairs in here is horrifying for her. And there may come a day when probably not, but there may come a day when she looks back on everything that she said and realized how unbelievably wrong she was and how destructive she's been.
It's all a performance. It's like performance. It's completely performative, and the idea that in our society now
that's
she's
what's
like
applauded.
She could be close to, like maybe a running mate for Bernie for president. It's astonishing.
But at the same time, I read she is now in the absence. I mean, the Bidens are gone, the Obamas, all of this. She is now the titular leader of the left. But she only has 10%. Like the next person is 9%. I don't remember who from there. So thank goodness the 10%. She's at the top, but 10% isn't really a commanding lead.
You take that kind of person and I think now amplify it with social media
and
with the relationship of one of the things I found so weird is how the relationship is upside down between politicians and they have followers now.
Yeah.
Like she'll go on, make a video and say, come on, you guys. Like,
right.
She's no longer a public servant that is held accountable and is supposed to represent their interests.
Right.
She has a following.
So do you want to call her a Führer? It's a little bit of a scary leap.
No, but it's closer. That relationship is much closer than anything on the right.
Yeah, because it is performative, and yet there's a very clear-cut agenda, and it is hate-filled and hateful. So it is kind of
the lack of seriousness and the attention seeking.
Well, and that is different from the who I cited, but utterly a lack of seriousness. It's making a mockery of everything. In fact, it's all a mockery.
And is this to me, this is an adult crisis.
Yeah, I agree.
So is that what's driving this?
Where are the grown-ups? And the grown-ups really have ceded everything to the children, which is why I think Trump terrifies people, because he is a grown-up, even though he's certainly not a grown-up in the standard way that politicians typically have been, statesman-like and that kind of thing. Although there's a certain statesman-like quality to him these days that I don't remember him having the last go-around. There's no question he's the adult in the room. And I would also say what we're seeing now is it's a real conflict between the alpha male and the female child. I mean, that's her, and he is. There's no question that what we've got going on in our current administration is the return of alpha men in just the hugest way. And even though many are women, they are in control. They are, Tulsi Gabbard, you just watch her and think, wow, this woman has it so together. And she's not in that role because she's a woman. She's in that role because she is the best person for it. Again, counterpoint to the Biden administration, where everyone was chosen based on boxes. I think, and this is another issue of the chasm, back to Heather McDonald, by the way, meritocracy. What the schools had really thrown out was the notion of meritocracy. It was all self-esteem. It was all feelings. I'm a believer in meritocracy. What we see with the current administration, with all the appointments, it's all merit. And the Democrats is nothing to do with merit. It's everything to do with various other characteristics, your skin color, your gender, your sexual all that, just things that have completely nothing at all to do with the task at hand.
Everything except for your merit.
Everything except for your merit. Where I think I've been reading through just tangentially a lot of the executive orders out of the Trump administration. And I started looking because I've been thinking a lot about education. And one of the things that I really think is important when we try to get the country back on track is the president needs to, this was my thinking before I read them, what the president needs to do is speak out boldly in advocacy of meritocracy, of American exceptionalism, of what's good and great about us, of what's important just in all realms. He needs to be bold and courageous and grateful to this country, cite everything that makes us great. And then I went and I read, but I thought that's kind of silly. Karen, you're really going to expect the president to do any of these things. I read these executive orders, and that's exactly what they lead with boldness, with courage, with gratitude, with descriptions of how and why we're as great as we are. And he mentions merit, and he mentions the things that are important. And he mentions how the 46th administration has destroyed all of those things, and how the left has destroyed those things, and Democrats have, and globalists have, how they've torn down the important things and replaced them with everything to do with gender preferences and so on. So he completely understands it, and he completely recognizes that those things have hurt us in a way that's kind of impossible to imagine, that you even come out with an executive order saying men are men and women are women. How far have we fallen as a nation that such a thing needs to be said? But it did need to be said, and now it's said, and now we can proceed just getting our footing back on sanity, which is hugely refreshing. And that people are pushing back is just, what on earth is going on?
I wonder how we get back to appreciating American exceptionalism. As someone who I think I had the benefit of growing up during the Cold War against that backdrop, that there was a threat.
Yes.
So you always have that looming. And then when I was a teenager and a student, I was like a hippie and like more of a hedonist than a leftist, I would say, like a vague leftist, I guess. But I had that upbringing of like watching Red Dawn.
Yes, right.
And like the Olympic hockey team and I was
Oh
into
my
sports.
word.
You always have that kind of foundation of American exceptionalism.
Exactly.
There's never been a society that is as progressive and free as the one that we have, and that
Right.
how extraordinary it is. Later, a little later, I went and lived abroad a couple of times, and that also made me appreciate how incredible this is with all of its flaws, etc. There's nothing like this. Like just the things like having a collective expectation of justice.
Yes.
Like in a judicial system, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
In human history, and it should be appreciated and defended. But how do you instill that in kids now that don't have there is no Cold War, there is no they're just sort of like online, meaningless, and I think are drawn into performative leftism. So how can we address that?
That's such a great question. It's something I think about a lot, and you just packed so much in there. As to having grown up during the Cold War, it does help having a bipolar view of the world, good guy, bad guy. And we knew that there was an enemy. We knew that there was an existential threat, even though it turns out they weren't as strong. It doesn't matter. They could have been. And without the strong stances that we took, Reagan, the work that I did, for example, they might have been stronger. And they were first to the moon and so on. And you mentioned Miracle on Ice, which, by the way, there were two, when I taught at the school in Rhode Island, 2 movies that I showed my students. We could come up with an elective we wanted to teach. One of them I showed Miracle on Ice because it was fabulous. And the other one was, I think it was called October Sky, about the very beginnings of, it wasn't even the space race, but it kind of was. So how the world changed with Sputnik. So we grew up with that knowledge. And I think, just as an aside, the left recognizes that you need kind of an enemy to unite behind. And they've chosen various things, one of which is climate change. So they want to unite us to fight climate change. And this came up in even the hearing this morning about what happened with the Signal chat, was why Miss Gabbard, which they should have called her by a better honorific, did you not have climate change as one of the major national security threats? Well, because it's not. But this is a constant thing, that they're trying to create this false other side that we should unite against. So the left recognizes you need that. Also, though, as you note, and I've been thinking, like I said, a lot about this, we were very aware of the other enemy. There are, in fact, other enemies now, real ones. China, for example, Iran, communism generally is still an enemy. We did last year a series. We took a conference called World War III, the early years. We had all-day conference. It was born out of a 2-day conference we did in 2023 with Steve Bannon. We are in a state of war, in fact. And China, their perspective of war, they engage in something called unrestricted warfare. The idea being, you're not even aware that you're in a war and you're already losing. Unrestricted warfare takes the form of open borders, fentanyl, TikTok, the flooding through our borders, not just of open borders, but of battalions worth of fighting age men from China. It's the buying up of farmland. It's satellites. It's all of that.
Balloons,
for example,
flying
openly,
across
that we do nothing about. It's our ports. It's all of our supplies. It's pharmaceuticals. By the way, it's a virus. So there's a lot of things that we have been under attack without even being aware. So one of the things that I've been trying to sort out, you mentioned Red Dawn. I was a huge fan of Le Carré and various spy stuff. My dad was from Berlin, so everything to do with the wall and all of that was very close to my heart. We were awash in information, not only in the news, but in entertainment about the Cold War. There is no such thing now about China. Why is that? Is that a weird coincidence? No, it's because China has a huge stake in all our media, and our media wants to sell to the Chinese market, and so they play it very safe. I find this appalling. So books need to be written, shows need to be made, reality TV shows, movies. We need to cover all the media with the same genre material that we did during the other Cold War, which, by the way, we won. So kids are not aware. And in that vacuum, because there is a need for the other side, they are propagandized too with climate change. And simultaneously, and this is one of the most horrifying things, we were taught to love our country against the bad guy. They are taught to hate their country. And this is such a damaging thing for children, for society, for our country, and for our national security. When you grow up believing strongly in the founding and the Declaration of Independence and the heroism and the risk-taking, the adventurism, all of it, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, your view of the country is going to be 180 degrees by design from the 1619 Project. And again, that's part of what President Trump has in these executive orders is a restoration of who we in fact are as a people. That's not to say we're perfect. We are humans. The country is formed of humans. This idea that we did bad things, of course we did bad things. There are things to be ashamed of in our country, but overall, in a way that no other country can cite, we have aimed to do good and be good. Were we perfect? No. But our aspirations were always good. And we continue to aspire in the same way. Tell me France does it. No other nation exception of Israel. Generally speaking, though, nations don't view themselves in that kind of an ideological light of the struggle of being good. Our story, The Miracle at Philadelphia, brilliant book about the drafting of the Constitution. They struggled every day with creating a country in the best possible way. Unheard of. And when you reframe it as 1619, what are you doing to children? You're making them ashamed in every way, and it kills the country.
Yeah. I often, with a lot of members of Congress and the Senate, particularly on the left, but not exclusively on the left, I often feel these people don't deserve what they've inherited.
They do not.
And they make a mockery of it. It's disgraceful.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And it's horrifying. And Congress is one thing, but to me, when senators have this kind of deluded ignorance or deliberate ignorance, either way, and
they don't even understand the First Amendment.
They don't understand any of it at all, and they don't. If they understood it, they don't embrace it. So for me, if you were to ask, what would be the one thing I would do to get the country on track? Not that you're asking me this. To me, the 17th Amendment really pulled a major leg out from under how this entire structure of the country was crafted. Senators were supposed to be representatives of the states, not the people of the states particularly, but the states. They were supposed to be selected by state legislatures. And that was by design. Congress was for us. Senators were for the states. Once the 17th Amendment came in that said, You can be elected by the exact same people who are electing Congress. You've just eliminated one of the very important differentiators in how this whole thing was put together. So I would say, for me, repealing the 17th Amendment, 16th also about income tax, but 17th for sure. We need to restore that kind of balance with that kind of representation. And senators thereby would become less beholden to the vagaries and the emotionalism that we the people have. The founders, the crafters, the drafters of the Constitution knew that. And it can't all be a PR thing. We are just people. And by the way, back in the day, women couldn't vote and you needed to own property. So you had to, I could do without the 19th also if it caused too much issue. But I think being a property holder, a stakeholder, isn't a bad thing in all of this.
Right.
So we've gone awry in a lot of ways, I guess, is my summation.
Yeah. Something I've been thinking about recently in the context of all of this is the Iraq War and Bush Jr.
Yeah.
And I feel like it can't be overstated enough how much damage he did and the neocons did
Yeah.
To American reputation, so that, you have like the anti-colonial leftists, but then also on the right, people like Tucker Carlson who are like complete and total isolationists.
Yes.
Apparently, which I personally find just as childish as leftists.
Likewise.
That we can just withdraw from the world entirely. That we don't need global trade and shipping lanes, and that the world isn't a chessboard of interests and resources.
It very much is a chessboard, isn't it?
There's this segment of the right that is like, it's so childish.
Right. I think that can happen. I think the question has to be less, if it's not America, it doesn't matter. But what of whatever is, in fact, in our national interest? And I would say that many things, even though they're not on the continental United States, are in fact in our national interest. I argue very strongly everything to do with Israel is in our national interest. I believe in Western civilization, and where it is combated, I think we need to shore it up. That's not to say always boots on the ground, but there are things that one can do. The Gulf War is kind of an interesting thing, though, for me.
Why do you think, can I just ask about Israel for a second?
Yeah.
Why do you think I think it's sort of the front line of in the battle for Western civilization.
It is. Exactly right.
But why should American taxpayers, why should we fund Israel?
It is on the front lines of Western civilization. 100%. You don't let a bastion of that kind of freedom surrounded by totalitarianism fall. I mentioned my dad was from Berlin. He was there, born in 1928. He was there during the blockade. West Berlin was a little island surrounded by the Soviet Union, essentially. East Germany, East Berlin, all Soviet controlled. It would have been very easy to let the siege of West Berlin just go and let West Berlin fall. I think it was absolutely the right thing to do the airlift for as long as it took, to say, you don't get to do that. We had an agreement. This was the agreement. This is West Berlin. You don't get to cut them off. You just don't. It was a bastion of freedom surrounded by totalitarianism. I see Israel, to some extent, exactly that same way. We had an agreement. You defend them. and they are in our national. You don't let. I don't want to use the word domino, but you don't let them fall, because they are, again, bastion of freedom. They are the bastion of Western civilization. They are the farthest outpost. They struggle. You
There's a
just
lot
don't
of
get to. You don't get to take them on.
Yeah, I hear a lot of like, especially on the, I don't know what this faction on the right, of like AIPAC and Israel and the Jews control America and everything.
It's
Um,
oh yeah, isn't that just really? It would be funny if it weren't so horrifying.
yeah,
And they live. Berlin was under siege for I don't know how long. Israel has been under siege from before its inception. And it was the international community, whatever that means, that helped create it, that helped restore it from what it had been. All the rest are fabrications. I mean, I could go on. The whole Palestinian notion is a fabrication. Palestine, Gaza, these are fabrications. You simply do not allow that kind of thing to stand.
yeah. But the
I don't think
propaganda has been tremendous
it's very
at
effective.
American universities.
Well, and then let's trace that back. Who funds American university? Not 100%, but the biggest funders are Qatar
Yes.
and China. So need we really wonder why this is happening on our universities? It's all completely by design. It's all the clubs. It's all the Students for Justice in Palestine. It's the Confucius Institutes. Various brilliant. You've got to give them all kinds of props for being very, very cunning. All the left has always known the way to destroying a civilization is get at the kids. And that's by the time they're in university, let alone the earlier years where so much of the damage has already been done. So any of these, quote, spontaneous protests, none of them are spontaneous. They've all been planned a very long time, and then they can kick in. And you had mentioned Benghazi. Benghazi, to me, was evidence of the media's complicity in all of this.
How so?
What had happened, Benghazi is shorthand for September 11th, 2012, when our mission in Benghazi with, I guess, Ambassador Chris Stevens was there with a handful of other people, and it was deemed a diplomatic mission. The quote, Arab Spring had been happening. All these peace, love, kumbaya, little democratic flourishings were happening, which is not at all the case. Ambassador Stevens knew that there had been these protests. He knew that Benghazi was going to be a target, especially September 11th. He had begged Hillary Clinton in the months before, weeks, days, hours, for support. All we heard in the media was peace, love, kumbaya. Democracy has been brought to the Middle East. Yay, we should all be applauding. And this was all happening under Hillary Clinton. Wonderful, how happy everybody is. We knew this was complete nonsense. If you knew anything about anything, you knew that this was nonsense. But the media was covering. The media was showing this as a success for Hillary Clinton. Then we discover, we wake up in the morning of September 12th to the massacre in Benghazi. The media continued to cover. And that's when I realized the left is going to do what it's going to do. The Democrats are going to do what they do. But they can only do this with cover of the media.
And was this your moment?
That was absolutely my moment of, so I had told you about Thomas Sowell and all of that, and I understood. I happened to be on the right. But that galvanized me to, this must stop, because, so the morning of the 12th, I learn of this, and I'm looking around, and I thought, everyone's got to be up in arms about the media. Everyone's got to be losing their minds. Nobody was. And so a thought came to me. I'm hurling myself around. I'm just traumatized in a very peculiar way, feeling so betrayed, and now people are dead. And what had happened in Benghazi really tapped into something in me. The deaths, the violence, the horrifying, the torture, all of it, just every aspect. And I thought, surely people must be rising up, and nobody was. And the thought came to me, what would Andrew Breitbart do? What would Andrew Breitbart do? And I had met Andrew a number of times. And but it was still a weird thing to come to mind. And I just heard he would just do it. And so I just put something together that I reached out to a handful of people I know. I was not political. I wasn't even living in California at the time. I was out here taking care of my parents' home. Just do it. And so I reached out and started Rage Against the Media. And we held a number of protests and rallies. And I had a little conference on how to become an activist.
You're like the OG.
I know. And I think back, and if I had known then what I know now, which is it's really, really hard to do this. But I did learn in the moment there is no such thing as a spontaneous protest, because I put one together and it took a few months and it was really hard. So yes, I was very early days. And again, the story of my life seems to be just I go from naively doing something to naively doing something else. But I learned so much in the process, and I met so many, the real OGs, the real powerful, intellectual, active voices.
Is this when you met Steve Bannon?
Yeah, that came around that time, and Bill Whittle, and just a whole lot. Many of these people have sort of gone by the wayside, but LA used to be a real hub of right-wing activism.
I wanted to ask you about LA.
Yeah, it was pretty great. And this is not that long ago.
Just after meeting you, I've met like a few other people that are kind of MAGA.
Yes.
In this city, and we spoke about this WhatsApp group of secret Hollywood people that are kind of, I forget what it was. Is it called something?
Yeah.
Can you not say what it's called? This is like a real bone of contention for me. Because I think I told you this. I met someone on Twitter who's like a local politician, like a kind of low-key MAGA person, who saw my Liberals for Trump thing.
Yeah.
And he was like, there's a WhatsApp group of powerful Hollywood people.
Yeah.
I sent them your video, and I'm going to see if we can let you in to the group chat. And I initially was like, oh, cool. There are all these other people. And then I thought about it, and I thought, all of these like heads of studios, actors, people in positions of power know better and are doing nothing and are on like a bitchy little WhatsApp group. Like, oh my God, I can't believe, like, fuck you. I'm like a total pariah with no power.
Right.
And I'm out like publicly paying social consequences. So I have no time for those people. Like, I don't give a shit. I saw this thing with Gwyneth Paltrow the other day, who's like, ooh, she's like Maha curious. Like, I bet you Gwyneth Paltrow voted for Trump in 2020. Like, there's no way she didn't.
Yeah.
And now she probably has a PR firm that's like, we're just going to test like your curiosity with Maha and see if it's okay for you to wade into this and now be like a Maha mom with Nicole Shanahan. Like, fuck you.
Right. It's a very safe little gateway.
So how is
into these
that,
things.
like, what is the state of affairs? And I've connected with Amanda Milius, whose father made Red Dawn, and her film, The Plot Against the President, was like fundamental for me when I had for me, it was like sort of the fine people. My Benghazi was like seeing the fine people, and then you just can't unsee it. The Russian collusion stuff in the New York Times. You're like, oh, I have to go to like source material. It's a wrap. Like, no one can be trusted
completely. Right. And just to Brandon Strzok, who founded the Walkaway movement, gay hairdresser from New York, came completely unglued when Hillary lost, because now Trump is going to round everybody up, put them in camps, discovered that whole handicapped reporter meme was a lie. Yeah. And once he discovered that one was a lie, to his infinite credit, went and discovered what else was a lie and found out it all was. So it was all exploiting various groups, exploiting all of us. So, and founded the walkaway movement. I'm just biggest fan. As to the Hollywood people, though, their timidity, at best, cowardice, really, has always struck me as kind of appalling. I was out there, and when I started Rage Against the Media, I was introduced to that group. And I was told, oh, these people are really going to be on your side. They're going to be, wanting to help you, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, but no. And they really were not. And this was, again, 2012 and 2013. They remained extremely closeted. And I have never cared. It's just not a thing. It's not that I'm brave, or it has nothing to do with anything. I just don't care. So if a thing needed to be done, and if nobody else was doing it, I was going to do it. And I remember at the time, even when I held my very first rally at CBS, thinking and saying, I'm standing here because for whatever reason you feel you can't. And I just don't care. So I'm speaking on your behalf as well. So I sort of took that mantle on, that I'm speaking for those who can't. But then it evolved a little bit for I'm speaking for those who won't, which is kind of where you are. The only reason they do get ahead is when we let them, and silence is consent and all of this. So the more people who...
Particularly with Hollywood, I just want to say, you talked about making content
Yes.
that we grew up with.
Yes.
What are they doing?
Can't.
Like, in positions to do this, they're
Right,
doing
right.
nothing. They're
They're-
making woke garbage.
They're woke garbage and bitching about it.
On
Meanwhile,
WhatsApp.
though, on WhatsApp,
Is there a lower form of humanity than that? Than a Hollywood
that's pretty
head of
low.
studio, like, complaining on WhatsApp
I know.
and making
Just see the little
Snow
girl
White?
crying. And meanwhile, one would hope, and I think a lot of it is contagious. With Donald Trump, with his "I don't give a damn, I'm just going to speak out,"
Yeah.
and then there's a handful, to their credit, John Voight, obviously, Mel Gibson,
James
there's
Woods,
James
but
Woods.
these are like
perfect.
right-wing people. Like, they've always been
They've
outspoken.
they've always been, and they don't give a damn. And the saving the country is key. And people, well, they're successful, so they can do it. Plenty of them are successful who still won't take the risk. And I find that at this point in my progression through all of that, really, it's sickening. But that's it. It is sickening. Hollywood, though, has been on such a path of self-destruction between COVID and wokeism and the strike, that there have been so many plus just technology, so many alternatives coming up, that now to do those things that we were talking about, I'm talking about making the red dawn of the present and various Cold War related, truth related, pro-America, anti our enemies, books, movies, television. It's eminently doable now. And you don't have to feel limited by the establishment, whatever. And that much more of that needs to happen. By the way, technology with AI, one can do this kind of thing too. And I'm seeing increasing
that's a whole other
a whole other.
subject
But it
that
does. People are to a decreasing amount at risk in that regard,
Yeah.
of
I would like
putting
to
their
see
ideology forward.
like Peter Thiel or Elon or whoever start a movie studio.
Exactly
and,
right.
Like, let's start over and let other people.
Right.
The rest of it can just let
Right.
it die.
And I really thought, if you recall, during COVID, there were a number of reasons. Movies were shut down, and everyone thought the whole movie industry is dead. Nobody's ever going to go back to the movies again. It's too woke. It's just 1,000 reasons. And then comes out Top Gun Maverick.
Right.
And we went insane. I saw it 5 times in the theater. I know people who saw it more than that in the theater, and I still cried every time.
Yeah.
There really is a hunger for that kind of cool heroism, dynamicism, go America, warrior, and plus it was funny, and that I really expected much more of that ilk to come out of that, because that proved what the people want. And now, I mean, in contrast to the debacle of a Snow White that just came out, I mean, it's so they know what works. And yet, and this was part of the Rage Against the Media thing, people would argue, don't they realize that they're losing customers by doing this kind of thing? My argument was, honestly, they don't care. A lot of the media, whatever that means, people who get into the media for various reasons, the journalists, the movie makers, really are activists. They are doing this to change the world. So if you believe, as Andrew said, politics are downstream from culture, they wanted to do everything to change the culture. And they were pretty effective at it. On the other hand, there's still a huge rejection of it. And politics is kind of in the forefront right now. People are realizing to a greater extent, you can't really separate them. That if the left tries to achieve political aims through the culture, through straws, through bathrooms, through men and women's sports, all that's culture. They've erased the divide between politics and culture. There is no divide anymore. And so I think we need to take that on board a little bit. But yes, we need to get out there. We need to make more movies. We need to understand the relationship between politics and culture. Trump needs to continue to be exactly what he's doing in this regard. Like I said, I've been writing about education, and all right, I'll just go ahead and jump in here. About 2 weeks ago, I came up with an idea, and you can tell me if it's a stupid idea. It's a stupid title of it, but I like the idea. The Center for Celebrating America.
I love it. But done with style.
Done with style.
That's traditionally, I think conservatives have had a problem with branding.
Yes.
The movement and making
Yes.
good content. And
Yes.
I think that's changing a little bit with like the Passage Press
Yes.
crowd.
Yeah.
There are
Interesting
some
you
kind of
mentioned
cool,
Passage Press. I was at their inaugural ball, in fact.
I wanted to go to that, and then I had at the last minute tried to get a ticket and couldn't, and had a place
was
to
in your
stay and
seat.
everything. It was
Yeah.
so upsetting to not be there.
I can imagine, because
Do you think that's like the cultural nerve center of the new
there's
MAGA?
more than one Imagines, I think.
Steve Saylor and Peachy Keenan is like another.
Right. So that, and then I think Steve Bannon is just head of the most extraordinary movement. And
yeah, I wanted to ask you about Bannon. Right before I saw you a couple of weeks ago, I had read about Bannon. I'd seen clips and stuff, and then I heard him on Tim Dillon's show, and I was just mesmerized by him. And I thought, if anyone apolitically was riding in a friend's car or something and heard that podcast and just heard this person speaking,
yeah.
you would immediately identify this person. Wow, this guy's brilliant and interesting, and he gives a shit.
Yeah.
If you were even on the left.
How
could you not feel that way?
Well, right.
And then
right.
it's Steve Bannon. So it's just it's kind of shocking, but he's just incredible.
Yes.
And he's the
true.
godfather of this movement.
I think so.
So how did you
I think so.
How did you connect with him? And is he is he still the kind of cultural center of this movement?
How did I connect with him? I had met him, I guess, when I was doing Rage Against the Media. I met him, I don't know, and then once. And then in the early days of COVID, I guess this is what happened. In the early days of COVID, very early days, very early, we had scheduled for 2020 a conference on anti-Semitism. Then I thought, well, we'll put that in abeyance. We can come back to that later. Sadly, it's an evergreen topic. I want to do something on China. And so I looked at, and Steve was one of the key people about China. And then I reached out and we started he agreed to be a keynote in July. Surely the world would be open by July 2020. And that didn't happen. And then I did a conference on globalist puppet masters. And I asked him if he would keynote. And he said yes. And he came out to Los Angeles. So that's really, I had looked to him to speak at events because he really has a lot to say on just about anything. So he came out and keynoted. And then he had me on a show a number of times. And then the World War III thing, we just sort of generated together.
Yeah.
And he keynoted each one of those up until he wound up in prison. And
he's an American hero.
He is an absolute American hero. I contend he's the one who came up with the phrase "Make America Great Again." I could be wrong, but it seems to fit. I think he's the main architect of the movement. I think the war room and everything it does is key to his having won in 2016, 2020, which I believe was stolen, and in 2024. And then the work that he continues to do on a daily basis is unbelievably powerful for this country, for populists all over the world, for freedom lovers all over the world. So, just an astounding man, and his ability to connect current events and to see them in such a strategic way and to connect them to ancient history. Nobody does that. So as you said, even if you're just listening in the car, no matter who you are, listening to him, you can't help but learn. And he doesn't, this is another thing that I appreciate so much. His show is number 1 or 2, depending on who you look at, in podcasts. There is not a word that is dumbed down for assuming that the people are too stupid. He really expects his listeners to be very smart, and they are. And that assumption is, back to the beginning of the conversation. He challenges us. He doesn't dumb anything down. He doesn't expect us to be infants in all of this. It's very elevated, and we rise to it. And how can anything be better for the country than that?
Yeah. And he's a fashion icon.
He's a fashion icon.
And he's funny. So, Karen, I think we have to wrap up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining. We'll have to do this
A real
again.
pleasure, Jonathan. Really great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.